Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Rather than try to make a whole series of amendments, Madam Speaker, I'd like to ask the indulgence of the body to set this aside for right now, and my staff and I will work with the committee to clean this up and to add into the testimony the committee report things that were provided in last year's hearing. All right?
Okay, so the motion then is to actually suspend discussion until later then.
Yes,
On that
please.
motion without any objections, so ordered. Okay, we're going to move on to, Mr. Vice Speaker. Wait. Where?
We'll move on to 14. Senator Duenas, you're recognized.
Si Zeus Masi, Mr. Speaker, manana si Zeus Talu, malagazut pega esti prenaponi 14, kimi na 3 na tinaitay, ta malagazu loko ita diskuti hesti na prenaponi. Thank you very much. Katotsi? Oh, dispensa. Si Zeus Masi, Mr. Speaker. Esta. Iprenaponi katotsi si Zeus Masi. As Mr. Speaker Ben Okorehizo. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to place Bill 14 in the third reading file, and I would like to discuss it briefly.
There being no objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, this bill is pretty straightforward. As it says in its title, relative to mandating the purchase or lease of vehicles by the government of Guam shall meet or exceed a minimum average combined city and highway mileage per gallon of 25 miles per gallon, and to add a new F to 5123 of Chapter 5, Title 5, Guam Code annotated to allow certain specialty vehicles to be excluded from the provisions of this act. As I said, Mr. Speaker, it's pretty straightforward, common sense bill. After seeing a recent report by the OPA and also understanding that the gas prices just seem to never go down, or even when they do, they only do so for a very short period of time and then rise again. It looks as though we're going to be suffering from high fuel costs for eternity, maybe, or until other technologies are availed upon by ourselves. But, Mr. Speaker, so in that thought process, we know that there are a number of government vehicles now that we see on a daily basis that are on our roads that sometimes only one driver, and you know, they are many SUVs on the road. We know that their gas mileage is not so efficient. So this was just an attempt to ensure that we can have GSA move forward on ensuring that the vehicles, you know, that are not necessary to have special purposes, such as vehicles that need to carry a multitude of passengers, vans, buses, specialty type vehicles, you know, that would be excluded from this provision. But any other opportunity with regard to small vehicles that could be used for purposes of the government needing to provide for their employees to need that type of transportation, this provision would be put in place. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, I also would like to say that this will end up being a companion bill, as Senator Rodriguez and I are also working on another bill that will be more comprehensive to include vehicles that will be running on renewable energy in the future. So this is kind of a starter bill to see if we can help bring down the costs and expense to the government under fuel costs, and also bring some more efficiency into our operations by having smaller, more compact vehicles wherever they can exist within our government. for the purpose of providing services to our people. So I thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to speak on this bill, and I hope that I could get my colleagues' support in this effort. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any other senators wish to be heard on this bill? Senator Tom Addy, you're recognized. Any other senators after Senator Addy? Senator Mooney Barnes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise in support of Bill 14-32. Admittedly, when I first read the bill, the concern that I had was that this bill might limit the choice, the pool that the government would be able to purchase its vehicles from. But I found in my readings, and actually going to the very website that was cited in the bill, that there's approximately 35 different models of cars that are sold on Guam, and approximately 95% of those vehicles will actually meet this minimum threshold of combined 25 miles per gallon. Now, of course, the goal here is to for the government to purchase vehicles that are economical so that it can reduce at least its expenditure on the purchase of fuels. But the irony of it is that, you know, while we may get a vehicle that is very economical and has a minimum of 25 miles per gallon to it, there's other factors that actually affect the gas consumption equation. One is how we drive. You know, does that driver take the rabbit takeoff at the traffic light? Where do we drive? So certainly the vehicle that has to drive down to the south to where there's a lot of hills would certainly consume a lot more gas than a vehicle that's driving on a pretty relatively level ground from Agana, let's say, to Tamuning. A third factor in the equation, of course, is the vehicle maintenance itself. And we know basically the history with Guam vehicles. We buy it, and as long as when you turn the ignition, the engine starts, that's all that's necessary, and you drive off, regardless of whether the tires may be under pressured, the oil hasn't been changed in many months. And so, you know, without that effective preventive maintenance, we pretty much kind of just nullify the fuel efficiency. And also the other thing is that normally a lot of this, you know, the fuel efficiency that the vehicle is rated for normally doesn't kick in until about after 3,000 to 5,000 miles after the engine is broken in. And of course, that one, probably one of my other colleagues here, will probably a better expert to speak on that than I could, but that's basically what I got from my reading. But nonetheless, I think Bill 14-32 is very important because every contribution that we can make to reducing fuel consumption on our island here translates to the reduction in dollars that is spent to purchase fuel from overseas. And instead, that money then can be used to purchase other goods and commodities on island and have that circulate here. And of course, from an environmental standpoint, the less fuel consumption, the less fuel that is burned, then we reduce the carbon emissions, which is a part that we can all play in the global effort to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. I would, however, like to propose a couple of amendments. And the first amendment I would like to make is in Section 2 of Section 2 on page 5, one that in view of the fact that vehicle maintenance is really very important in the fuel economy of that vehicle, I would like to add at the end of line 15 there, the phrase, vehicle procurement solicitations shall include preventive maintenance services during the warranty period. So As I understand it, I'm not, sorry?
You're talking about page 5?
No.
I only have a 2-page.
No, I said section 2, line 5. On page, I'm sorry, page 1, section 2, at the end of line 15.
Okay.
To add the phrase, vehicle procurement solicitations shall include preventive maintenance services during the warranty period. And so with that amendment, that then at least will provide some assurance that that vehicle is going to get the preventive maintenance that it needs within this warranty period, which could be anywhere from 3 to 5 years. Now, that means that that vehicle may be a little bit more expensive than otherwise, but we might as well, purchase that assurance at the time of purchase of the vehicle. So that, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, is my amendment at Section 2 for Bill 14.
Thank you. On that amendment, does anybody require that in writing right now, or does everybody understand?
The amendment reads, at the end of line 15, we add the phrase, the sentence, vehicle procurement solicitations shall include preventive maintenance services during the warranty period.
Everybody understand that amendment? Anybody wish to speak on the amendment? Senator Pangilinan, recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker. I'm just not sure, but I would think that the preventive maintenance during the warranty period would be part of the warranty, or at least part of the purchase price. I'm not sure if maybe it's only during a lease. Is it part of it? Or is it, somebody here may want to enlighten me on it, because it just seems like, I know that, we're trying to save some money, but we're going to be spending a whole bunch of money on preventive maintenance if we don't have to do it. So I just wanted to clarify that. I know some have been in the automobile industry here, so maybe somebody else can have some information.
Besides practicing law?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just as a point of information, based on what usually happens for purchases of brand new vehicles, there's usually a warranty period of the miles up to the first year, or 12,000 miles, whichever comes first, or for a purchase of additional warranty, extended warranty is what they would call it, for a period to exceed either 5 or 6 years, or 72 or 74, or even up to 100,000 miles, whichever comes first. So the good speaker is right that for this warranty period, sometimes depending on the proposals and the RFPs that go out, this would have to be included, this kind of provision would have to be included in the RFP or what have you, because it is not included, usually not included.
Senator Abbott, does that?
Oh, no, the question was from the gentleman
Yes.
from Barrigada, but my understanding of what the warranty covers is really for your drivetrain and some of the other major components. A transmission drops out, but it doesn't really normally cover for the change of oil and all that. And I'm sure there's others in here who probably would be also well versed in what normally a warranty covers.
Did you wish, you can speak now. You can speak, and then I'll allow.
It's usually just bumper-to-bumper powertrain, usually 1 year.
And the proposal was to have the RFP include maintenance.
The proposal was to have preventive maintenance as part of the purchase package, at least for the period, for the warranty period. Now, in my mind, at least the vehicles that I've bought, they've always, the warranty period has always been for like a period of up to 70,000 miles or 5 years. I haven't heard of a vehicle that only has a warranty period of 1 year. But at any rate, so if a warranty period for whatever vehicle is being bought is just for 12 months, then, you know, and if somebody wants to extend it and say for, you know, 60 months, then so be it. But at least I'm proffering an amendment that says for the warranty period, whatever that might be.
Okay, so the amendment is just for the warranty period and not an RFP for extended warranty.
Yes, yes.
On that amendment, anybody else wish to be heard? Okay, either one of you. Which one? You still have a question, or Senator Pangilinan?
Mr. Speaker, not fully realizing that I don't fully understand the entire scope of this thing. You know, I would think that you'd want the preventive maintenance when there's no warranty. Because, well, you have a warranty. If you don't provide your preventive maintenance, then you void your warranty. I think those are the terms and conditions of the warranty, that you have to stick to that. So somehow I just get this feeling that it's in there. It's in your purchase price. It's in your lease costs already. And are we buying something on top? Are we saying we're going to buy something on top? I mean, I'm just, when we sat with the bus people at DPW, and we talked about, remember the round table that we had and, on trying to purchase new buses, and that there was a proposal to put in all this schedule of maintenance and warranties and so forth. And the mechanics at Public Works who have worked with the warranties and maintenance and so forth indicated that it really was much cheaper for them to be able to do the preventive maintenance stuff, that the only preventive maintenance would be your very, very basic that is included in the cost of the buses usually. And I'm not sure that vehicles will be much different in terms of that. So if we're going to include it as part of it, you know, and we know that, at least from the testimony of the DPW motor pool, that they could do it cheaper with regards to some of the more less basic of the preventive maintenance. So maybe the comfort I would find is to just add that, you know, it has to be cost out, that if it costs less than what it would cost the DPW motor pool or department agency mechanics to provide that maintenance service, so that, you know, we don't just go in blindly and say we're just going to buy it no matter what it costs. We've got to be able to price it, ensure that we're getting the best deal we can, and so forth. So if I know that the amendment was read verbally, but maybe if I can make an amendment to the amendment that provided that the cost of the preventive maintenance is determined to be less expensive than providing the service with in-house resources of the government of Guam for the respective departments and agencies. Because some, like Judiciary, I think may have a mechanic or two. I know definitely DPW and some of the agencies and so forth. So I just don't want to make it open-ended, that we're going to buy it no matter what. I want to make sure that we kind of have a checks and balance in terms of what it would cost us to do so. So I would make that amendment to the amendment to just ensure that we have some way of knowing that we're getting a good deal on these preventive maintenance. So.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just, maybe if it'll help a little bit, based on Public Law 29-138 that was introduced in the 29th Guam Legislature, there was a provision that this new legislation is adding to a new section, but it says that it is relative to requiring vehicles purchased or leased by the government of Guam be most few efficient model available that will fulfill the intended government function. And then it has the prerequisites of what is needed, and then there's a provision on 5 that would include in this Public Law 29-138 the cost of maintenance and warranties over the expected useful life of the vehicle. And then there's 5 other subsections to this Public Law 29-138. So that probably will address some of the concerns based on that. But I do want to say that when vehicles are normally purchased, there is a warranty period, usually for 1 year, or the miles that is used during a 1-year time frame. And the service for the first time service is usually paid by the vendor. And then anything after that can be purchased. So like for the first year, if you exceed for the first 12,000 miles or 15,000 miles, I'm just giving you a hypothetical because I think it really is 36, but I don't have the numbers in front of me. It's covered under what they call a bumper-to-bumper train and will and train coverage, and then everything else is purchased after that. But again, based on the legislation that we created in 29-138, there were some provisions that were included into the specifics of the RFP that will include inclusive of the cost of maintenance and warranties. Santa Masi.
Senator Lim-Tianco.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do support the amendment to include the maintenance of the vehicle. You know, in my experience in buying cars, and in our industry as well, from my former employer, the preventive maintenance is not covered in the purchase of the vehicle. It could be covered in the lease if you negotiated in the lease, but it's not covered in the purchase of the vehicle. In fact, failure for you to provide preventive maintenance on the vehicle will void any and all warranties associated with the vehicle to begin with. So if you don't change your oil and you go in and you say my car's not running anymore, your warranty is void. You don't get to claim on that. So I do support it. Thank you very much.
And on the amendment to the amendment as proffered by Senator Pangilinan, Senator Lim-Tianco.
I'm sorry, one last thing. Now more than ever, it's important that the dealership provides the preventive maintenance, because now these vehicles are equipped with electronic control monitors. They're basically computers in the vehicles. It's not like in the old days where you're just looking for whether you have a fuel supply or air supply or combustion. Now you actually got to hook up your laptop computer to the machine and figure out what's wrong with this vehicle. So if we're going to rely on our agencies such as DPW to properly maintain these vehicles, where are we going to provide them with the training to get certified in this type of diagnostic equipment? And are we going to equip them with the tools so they have the tools necessary to do their job? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lim-Tianco. Senator Tom Addo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I'm speaking on the amendment to the amendment.
Please.
And on that, I can understand there's the Transportation Maintenance Division, for example, of Public Works, which is supposed to provide the maintenance services for all of the government vehicles, except for agencies like GPA, and I believe GWA. A couple of the agencies have their own maintenance shops, but we do know that in the case of DPW, they've got like a total of 9 mechanics that are basically trying to maintain approximately 110 buses. That alone takes up all the time that they have. And so any other vehicles, certainly public health does not have a maintenance shop of its own. So they normally would have to go out and probably go to a private company to get the maintenance services. But I think under ideal conditions, if the maintenance division in fact had sufficient manpower and resources, tools and whatnot to be able to service all the different types of vehicles, then certainly that is very logical, and we would want to send the vehicles there, and they could probably do it cheaper there. We know that in the case of the buses, they've already determined that they can provide preventive maintenance cheaper and just as well as the private sector can. You know, we can go ahead and put that, you know, if the Department of Public Works is a less expensive alternative, and in fact they can provide the preventive maintenance services, then by all means, of course, we should go in-house. But, you know, the reality of it is that DPW does not have the resources available to be able to provide preventive maintenance services to all the other vehicles, much less just the buses alone. Thank you.
All right, so we have the Pangilinan amendment to the ADA amendment. Anybody else wish to speak on either? There any objection to either or both? There being.
So what exactly was the amendment to the amendment?
His amendment is that the
Available and is less expensive. Okay, fine.
okay. So if everybody would have that written down and signed off on. Okay. Hearing no objection. Senator Abbott?
Well, now I guess we got to vote on the amendment as amended.
Okay. Any objection to the amendment as amended? Any objection? Senator Limchako, you rose.
I still got the floor.
Okay, wait. There was something on. Did you have anything on that one?
On the amendment as amended?
No, on the amendment to the amendment.
Okay, then go ahead, speak. No, the amendment. Okay. Go ahead, Senator Limchako.
My apologies, Mr. Speaker. I just want to, as a point of clarification, this is for procurement of a vehicle. So in regards to the amendment, the stipulation, if it can be done for less at DPW, wouldn't we need to know that before we issued the RFP? So how could we issue an RFP if that's subject to that amendment, the amendment to the amendment?
Anybody wish to address that?
It seemed like you would have to make that determination before the RFP would, the specification on the RFP would be made.
Right,
Whether it's going-
or else you bifurcate the RFP. You have the basic lease plus the preventive maintenance, and you can separate the two out.
Oh,
And
I
then
see. So there'd be two separate components to the.
Components to the bid.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's one way of doing it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The chair is going to take a short recess.
Council has brought to my attention that probably it would be best if I withdrew the amendment that was made, the amendment as amended, and instead what we really want to do to address the concern is to amend the same section, section 5123 of Guam Code Annotated, and amend subsection C. Right now, subsection C of section 5123, which pertains to motor vehicles, it reads as follows: the Chief Procurement Officer shall determine when procuring the vehicle fleet whether a contract for maintenance should be included in the contract for purchase. And when you read that, it gives the impression that it's a subjective sort of thing. Do we want to maintain the vehicle or not? In this case, the amendment that I was wanting to make was that there really should be no two ifs, ands, or buts about it. A vehicle needs to be provided preventive maintenance in order to maintain its fuel economy and its level of performance. So the amendment that I would like to make instead then is that on section 5123 of Guam Code Annotated, and I don't have the full citation here, but it will really read on subsection C that the Chief Procurement Officer shall include preventive maintenance services in the contract for purchase. And so that takes away then the subjectiveness of, do we want services today or not? So that might be an amendment. Now, this particular subsection of 5123 still addresses the concerns that were raised by the gentleman from Barrigada, in that the Chief Procurement Officer shall determine whether it be less costly to contract fleet maintenance with private businesses, and if less costly, to then do so from the private business. But if not, because DPW can in fact provide the preventive maintenance, then they should go get their maintenance from DPW. So I think this addresses my concerns, and it addresses the concerns of the gentleman from Barrigada. So
So to make things clear then, there'll be a new section 4 amending section 5123C to put in shall.
That's correct. And I'll get with the clerk to provide the necessary language.
Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, just if by any chance I can pose a suggestion, because I do know that preventive maintenance can be applied towards brand new vehicles for a limited time frame. So, and it could be part of the warranty program, an extended warranty versus overall preventive maintenance for the duration of the vehicle. So if a time frame can be added to that particular verbiage, no less than 3 years, no less than 5 years, so that at least that would be incorporated into any responses that are provided by the businesses out there. So just a suggestion, because I think it's critical, otherwise you leave it open, and preventive maintenance provision may be, or service may be provided at least for 1 year, when that's not the intent of my understanding. That's not the intent of what is being proffered right now, perhaps a little longer time frame. So I would suggest that a minimum allocation or timeline be provided as it applies to that amendment, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Is that going to be a new, an amendment to Senator Addis' amendment? Senator Uggan, are you amending Senator Addis' amendment?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I just talked to the sponsor of the amendment, and he conceded that perhaps 3 years would be appropriate. No less than 3 years. So it still provides that flexibility beyond that timeline. So if I can amend the proposed amendment of subsection C to read no less than 3 years.
All right.
Thank
So
you,
the
Mr.
new
Speaker.
section amending subsection C puts shall and 3 years as a minimum. So would the two of you get together and write the amendment out and provide it to the clerks?
Right, okay.
Any objection to the amendments proposed by Senators Atta and Uggan? Any senator wish to be heard? Yes. Adding a new C. I mean, amending section C, a new section 3 to the bill. Okay, anybody? And would the two of you please get together? All right. Any objections? No objection. Subsection C is hereby amended. On the main motion. Oh, okay. Senator Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to proffer another amendment on Section 2 there. And really, you know, every year the car manufacturers are continually upgrading the efficiency of the vehicles. And so today, 25 miles per gallon may seem to be a reasonable minimum requirement standard that we want to have on our vehicles. You know, by next year, maybe 30 miles per gallon, 40 miles per gallon may be just as easily achievable. And so I would like to put at the end of, on Section 2 there, on line 15 at the end, just put in the sentence, this standard shall be reviewed and updated at least every 3 years. So we come back every 3 years and review it, and we may find that, you know, 95% of the vehicles can in fact achieve 30 miles per gallon rating.
On the added amendment, anybody wish to be heard on that provision for a 3-year review? Hearing no objection. Any on the main motion on the bill? Senator Tina Munoz-Barnes.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak and rise in support of bill number 14-32, and thank the good sponsors and co-sponsor for introducing this legislation. As I noted earlier, Mr. Speaker, in the 29th Guam Legislature, I did introduce legislation similar to this, and again, it was requiring that vehicles purchased or leased by the government of Guam be the most fuel-efficient model available that will fulfill the intended government function. This bill 14-32 does establish a minimum combined miles per gallon standard for all vehicles to be purchased or leased for the use of our government of Guam to meet or exceed a minimum average combined city and highway miles per gallon. And of course, this, when we say miles per gallon, that is determined by the U.S. Department of Energy. There is a provision of bill number 14-32 that exempts a couple of vehicles, Mr. Speaker, and it is including but not limited to law enforcement vehicles, those with primary function to carry cargo, and then the specialized utility vehicles, construction vehicles, and any other vehicle whose primary function is other than that transportation of 5 passengers or fewer. And I maybe just want to get the sentiments from the good author to see why his thoughts were on exempting this, because as the good speaker from Manila spoke about technology and how we look at more fuel-efficient vehicles as time goes on. You know, today we have the Priuses, we have the Hondas that get you 40 to 50 miles per gallon, and having vehicles to this effect exempted, I just think it's like just not being really, how do you say that? Not giving the opportunity for all the fleet of government, all the fleet vehicles of government of Guam to be fuel efficient. So I just wanted to share his thoughts, have him share his thoughts on why these cars are exempted.
Thank you very much. Senator Duenas, do you wish to yield?
Yes, and thank you for the question. The general idea was that we didn't want to cause any confusion with regard to this establishment of this listing for those vehicles that we believe the Chief Procurement Officer would send out a notification upon passage of this legislation for all of the entities to report back. We kind of envisioned as we went along and named these type of activities as those that would seem to fit into the category of this would be too restrictive for police cars that need to achieve a certain, speed to keep up with maybe those who would be trying to evade them. Of course, construction vehicles that would be involved at DPW that would need to carry heavy materials and the like. So we generalized our statement to those that would seem practicable, that they wouldn't be the vehicles to be included. But we're really counting on in this section the Chief Procurement Officer to get the feedback from those entities as to what vehicles would be excluded. And so that was the simple effort here, and to try to put it in statute that it's clear that we understand that there are those vehicles that would be outside of this particular procurement tool just because of the nature of the work that these vehicles would be doing. So I'd be open to an amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Winnie Barnes, is that sufficient? Or
Yes,
Vice Chair?
it does, Mr. Speaker. And with that being said, maybe I could talk to the author of the legislation and probably deleting looking at deleting line number 8 when it comes to the passenger. So if I can just have
We'll take a short recess.
Thank you.
Barnes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to the author of the legislation. I understand the intent, and I will not be deleting any provision right here, but I do want to say that I do stand in full support of Bill number 14-32, Santa Mossy.
Thank you very much. Any other senators wish to be heard on Bill 14? Seeing none, I'll invite the sponsor to close.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank all of our colleagues here for their support, their expressed support on the floor, and also during the recesses and the discussions. I think even with Senator Tom Addis' amendment, would probably even answer some more of the retiring speaker's question to have this review process being done every 3 years. And perhaps they would even recommend back to us that it's not just the 5-passenger or lower, that some of the larger vehicles actually have the capacity and the mileage savings requirements as proposed by this legislation. So I think it was a great discussion. I would like to, at this time, before closing, Mr. Speaker, add Senator Tom Atta as the number 3 and Senator Tina Rose Munya-Barnes as number 4.
There being no objection,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
on the motion to send the bill to third reading file. There being no objection, we are now on bill number 1. Madam Speaker, you're recognized. You're recognized, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, my colleague as well, for adjusting the mic. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make a motion to place Bill 1-32LS as amended by the Committee on Appropriations, Public Debt, Legal Affairs, Retirement, Public Parks, Recreation, Historic Preservation, and Land on the third reading file, and I would like to discuss it.
There being no objection,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that every one of us who reads the papers or listens to the radio talk shows, that it seems that, you know, every week we hear about the Department of Education. They're in the headlines, making news. Unfortunately, it's not necessarily for some of the good things that we would like to hear about test scores going up, you know, and attendance improving, discipline down, all that. But instead, it's because school facilities have been vandalized, school property, of course, has been damaged, and other equipment have been stolen. So, and to remind our colleagues, just last year, December, there's been a rash of copper theft that affected the following schools. And I'd like to repeat these schools again. One is Finnegajan Elementary School, D.L. Paris Elementary School, F.B. Leon Guerrero and Simon Sanchez High School. Those 2 schools were affected by one theft. Finnegajan Elementary School was vandalized twice. F.B. Leon Guerrero Middle School was also vandalized twice. Antolon Middle and Weddingale Elementary School. And with Weddingale Elementary School, there was a theft of about 70% of the copper that had left the school without working air cons. And when that happens, many times the schools will close, and I think one of the biggest expense to the children will be the loss of instruction and educational hours. So according now to documents that was given to us by the Department of Education, is that in the past 3 years, and I know I just gave you one for just December, but in the past 3 years, there are about 218 instances of break-ins, and these are ranging from vandalism to destruction and theft of property. And they've indicated as well that a lot of it, you know, this break-in, majority of it actually occurs in the northern region, and we're looking at about 64.3% of our schools that's been vandalized. Out of 40 schools, that we have 40 schools, which includes J.P. Torres Alternative School, we know that we have only a few schools with cameras. Astumbo, Okadu, Liguan, and Atacal, 4 of those schools have security cameras, and because every one of these schools are under the municipal lease program. The schools that have partial security, and these are schools in which the PTOs were really involved and have purchased some of the cameras, and those are Simon Sanchez, Benevente Middle, and Inarajan Middle. Now, the school at Tijan, which is Antlan Middle School, is not under the control of DOE per se in terms of its facilities, and so that's not part of the figures that we have here. We all know that these thefts are extremely costly, and the taxpayers are the ones who are paying for this. Staff, of course, would be sent out to try to do repairs, clean up, and when you do this, the children, are not there. So we feel that, and I believe everybody feels that it is important to try to keep our children safe. We want learning to continue to happen. And one of the ways, and I say one because it surely isn't the panacea to any of these problems, is to actually install electronic security system, which will include security cameras, intrusion system, and an alarm system. The funding source for this bill to equip then our schools with the electronic security system will be from the government of Guam, from a 2002 short-term financing line of credit that will mature this fiscal year. We're looking at September. These funds then are from Section 30, and what will be made available is $1.281 million. The proposal then is to securitize these funds to purchase the security cameras, to install intrusion system, to provide monitoring system services, and annual maintenance of these electronic assets. And this will be paid up to 7 years. And my understanding that with some of these equipment, then you do have a shelf life. What we're doing in this bill is that which I will be making an amendment, is that although GITA will be the ones to go out and then go out to have this refinance, what we're trying to do here is that we would like to have, after the Department of Education has done or performed a system-wide comprehensive study to come up with the specifications. And the reason for this, and questions were asked during the public hearing, is that there are some schools that were vandalized. Copper wiring was cut outside the school facility, outside the building. And depending, of course, of these schools that have security cameras, whether they're strictly inside the classrooms or outside, and with the assessment that the department will do is to determine then where are blind spot areas in the school campus, where would be the best place to place them, and where maybe you do not want to place them. And that's important too, because you surely don't want to have these cameras like in the shower rooms. So you want to get them into nooks and crannies, hard to see areas, especially when you look at our high schools such as Southern High School. It's such a big campus, and you're unable to have even school aides there at all times. So those are some of the places, that's as an example of places in which the department will be able to make that determination, and how many and where. There is also language that discusses that in the event, of course, that the government has reached the debt ceiling, that the bill then would authorize GITA to pursue municipal leasing and not to exceed a term of 7 years. The other thing that's very important here, and we've learned this from a mistake, I would say, on our part, when we had $9.8 million that was, again, another bill that was going to mature at a certain time, and that was to build JFK High School. But in the public hearings that we had, we were going to put other projects inclusive of the high school. We wanted to do a public safety building, and we wanted to also provide a facility for the revenue and taxation, because they were leasing. I mean, they are leasing right now. Well, on the floor, as you know, the bill belongs to everyone, and through that whole process, those other projects were deleted, only leaving JFK as the project to go out to finance. as a result of that, somehow all those involved in the process, I mean, just kept doing change orders, and before we knew it, the dollar amount of that school kept rising, and therefore eating up, you know, majority, I would say 3/4 of the $9.8 million, leaving very little. Unfortunately, we're able to securitize at least a portion of that amount to do an expansion of Okudu High School. So in this bill, 1.281 will be available, and I don't want to find ourselves in that same situation. And you'll see then on page 4, and I thank, of course, OFB for working with us on this, is that we wanted to cap this dollar amount then to $800,000 then per year, so that then again, you know, we don't find ourselves down that road. The financing, because this is almost several parts to this cost, like I said earlier, is the cost to purchase the equipment. The second cost will be the annual maintenance, and then the third cost will be the monitoring service. This will have to go through a competitive process with a security vendor, and you know the way the process works is that it would be at the lowest possible cost to the government. And what I'm going to do at this point then, if I may take you to page 6 on section 58C105, is to, rather than put the Guam Economic Development Authority, that I would like to replace that with GSA to issue the, after the report is done, is to issue then the RFP to start the procurement process. So that is my first amendment. Page, the last page, sections 58C105. I hope you have the...
Does everybody have a copy of that amendment? It was marked as the first amendment. Would everybody please make sure that all the senators have copies of that amendment?
Well, actually, yes. Oh, it's not even numbered. It's the last page, and it should be on line 3, section 58C105, to strike out Guam Economic Development Authority and replace that with GSA, the Government Services Administration.
Does everybody get that amendment?
GSA.
Any objection? It's a very small amendment. It's not the major one.
Nothing for me to kill a tree to give you a copy. Did you get it? On the bill itself, if you look at the bill, the substituted bill? Yes, the substituted bill. Yeah, the last page of the substituted bill where it says section 58C105, line 3.
Any objection to that, Senator Abbott?
I just wanted to ask the mover of the amendment, why GSA? Why not DPW? DPW has the delegated authority for construction and buildings. I'm just looking at who's going to handle it more expeditiously.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and we, like I said, originally we thought GITA, because it's going to, the financing would be done by GITA. We thought about DPW, but GSA at one time for 6 months to help the Department of Education in its procurement process, that they're definitely very familiar, of course, with DOE, and have been working very closely with them to expedite the process. And that whole time, I don't have the data, but that whole time that GSA had actually conducted this for the department, that they were very successful. There were no protests, and GSA really is for most of the government, except those that we have delegated to do procurement. GSA has been the agency to do this for line agencies.
Is that okay?
So that's my first amendment.
On the First Amendment, any objection? Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just a quick question in regards to the procurement process, because individuals who have gone through really the use of the procurement, 60 days, I understand that we want to expedite it, but the funding source has been verified in terms of, Mr. Speaker, if I can ask the good speaker to, Speaker Wampat, to yield to my question, because imposing this timeline certainly is going to be directly linked to the availability of the funds.
I'm sorry, what was your question? Tom made me laugh because he...
Mr. Speaker, if I can just repeat the question to the good speaker, the other speaker, Speaker Wampat, if she can just respond. I guess you're looking at expedited procurement in this particular situation, and you and I know that really the funds need to be set aside immediately so that it can allow for the procurement to proceed within the timeline. That's the first question that I have. The second question is looking at some of the specs. I certainly hope that GSA takes into consideration working with DOE and they expedite the specs that are going to be provided through this. But the first question is really more or less, have the funds been identified? Is it going to be an issue in terms of GSA making sure that they certify the availability of funds to be able to proceed with this project within the timeline set?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, and Senator for the question. As I stated earlier, is that these the debt service right now that we have is for a short-term debt of since 2002. So the government is still obligated to continue to make that payment up until, so the money's there until it matures on the end of this fiscal year. So, and the process then of the 60 days, when you think between now and September, we're actually looking at least the longest 7 months, 6 months, you know, depending on how far this goes. 6 months is what will give GITA and, of course, GSA then the opportunity, and DOE, to do the study, turn it all in so that they'll be able to start the procurement process.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the response, but the sense I got was the funding source upon the conclusion of this fiscal year would be immediately available. Yes. And that the 7-month time frame between now and perhaps the end of October is more than ample time to finalize the specs in terms of the video camera system that's going to be utilized and to be able to go out and put the request for bid. So it comes back again to the availability and the imposition of a 60-day timeline. Is that reasonable unless we need to qualify this statement that upon the certification availability of funds, then within 60 days, GSA shall be tasked with that responsibility?
Can we address first your First Amendment and then these questions? Or is it answering these questions are important to...
Unless maybe...
Okay, Mr. Speaker, the good sponsor of the legislation did respond to my question, so okay. I'm satisfied with the response. My only follow-on issue is exactly what I stated previously. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, on the amendment, I don't know if I gavelled it in now. Any objection to the small amendment that was... Senator Respicio? On the amendment, I just want to take care of that so that the clerks have it. Is there any objection to the amendment? And then we'll... Correct. Okay. All right, on the main motion, you're recognized and continue.
Thank you again. I just have one more amendment, and I've spoken to legal counsel about this to really make sure that the language flows well. And on page 5, lines 15 to 20 has been reworded to make it, I guess, more legal and to flow better. And I'll just read to you, it's almost like just reversing the language that's on C, and I'll read the language to everyone. In the event that the financing of this project envisioned in this act be affected by the debt ceiling, GITA may pursue this project using municipal lease financing with the municipal lease not to exceed 7 years. Additionally, GITA may pursue, if it shall be advantageous to the government of Guam, alternative methods of financing, including but not limited to a short-term debt, mortgage, loan, or a federally guaranteed loan, or a loan guaranteed by any other instrumentality of the United States of America. Yes, so yeah, it's reversed from what we have in
On
the
that
substitute
amendment,
bill.
anybody wish to be heard?
And I did consult with legal counsel to make sure that legally this is what it is that we're saying here in the substituted bill, but more importantly that it flows better.
Okay. On the amendment?
No objection. Thank you. Oh, one more, if I may. And I'd like to thank, several of our colleagues here for their support. I know that Senator Yamashita and I have discussed this since last term. What can we do to help secure our school facilities? So I'd like to add her on as my third co-sponsor. And I would also like, as earlier I said, I do thank, of course, Speaker Ben for working very closely with me and reporting this out. And I'd like to include him as well as a co-sponsor.
There being no objection.
Thank you.
Senator Barnes and then Senator Duenas.
Si Dios Masi, Mr. Speaker, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on Bill 132-1-32LS as introduced by the good speaker, and I want to thank her for giving me the opportunity to be your second co-sponsor on this bill. I do have an amendment that I will add earlier, Mr. Speaker, but I just want to say that this bill number 1 begins the process of getting the much-needed security system into the Guam public schools. Again, it authorizes GITA to procure the, is it GITA still? GSA? To procure the installation and maintenance of electronic security systems, which is defined to include both security cameras and intrusion detections or the alarm systems. This bill authorizes the government to, GSA, to enter into a contract with the private company for not only the installation of these security systems in the public school, but also for the provision of monitoring and the maintenance services as well. Mr. Speaker, in other words, the contractor that is chosen will install the system, but also provide the monitoring service. And this means, like for example, that the company will actually monitor the security cameras, and the bill says that the monitoring service will be done 24/7 or as needed, which is to be determined working closely with the Department of Education. I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that I truly support this bill. When the good speaker was speaking earlier about this legislation, and she talked about the major break-ins, and as I was looking at previous reports and the report comparisons on 40 Guam Department of Education schools, she just mentioned real lightly that the break-ins totaled 218. But Mr. Speaker, when you take a look at the schools that were affected, like you take a look at MU Lahan, in Jonia from 2010 until today, that school was broken in 31 times. In Vicente Beneventi Middle School, That school was broken 21 times. Schools like George Washington was broken 17 times. Simon Sanchez 10 times. Other schools were broken, several other schools were broken 10 times, like Maria Yajoa, Finnegotten, and out of the whole 40 schools listed, 218 break-ins within the last couple of fiscal years, at least from fiscal year 2010 until now. I'm going to say this legislation is truly needed. And, you know, this bill is truly our attempt, indeed, this policy-making body's attempt to respond to what I believe is a crisis here. I know that the administration, Governor Calvo, on his part, has responded to this crisis by issuing an emergency procurement declaration, which allowed the Guam Department of Education to hire a security company for 30 days and to patrol the public school campuses, and that was that measure will cost the government up to $50,000 to $100,000. And that was what Guam DOE was reporting. But this bill, Mr. Speaker, goes far, even further, or goes beyond the fact that this is not just a Band-Aid repair. This is truly wanting to make a difference so that these break-ins can stop. I want to share with you an incident that happened at the Agana Boat Basin. When the folks there were getting their boats vandalized and their fish and their coolers stolen, they got together as a group and they literally spent the time to put the cameras up. And what had happened was somebody came and took the coolers, took the items, and there was a call out saying, you know what, you're on camera, we saw you, we'll give you 2 hours to return it, no questions asked. But if you don't return it, you're going to suffer the consequences, and you're going to have the police authorities come knocking at your door, and you're going to suffer the consequences. Believe it or not, Mr. Speaker, the items were returned, the fish was returned, the coolers were returned, the fishing rods were returned, and till today, I'm sure that the boat basin still has those cameras working, and I want to thank the good speaker for letting me in on the conversation, working closely with Senator Yamashita to find an avenue to make sure that our schools get protected. And I know there was a conversation at the public hearing in reference to not just the campus, but maybe the outside premises and around the perimeter of the schools. And of course, issues like that can be included or collaborated into the discussions of the RFP if necessary. But I think this is a very good legislation, and again, thank her for giving me the opportunity to be her number 2 co-sponsor. So Sana Maasi, and giving me the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to speak in support of this bill number 1. Sana Maasi. Oh wait, I did have an amendment, Mr. Speaker, by May, and on page 4, line 26. It would be line 26 after the word in subsection B of this section. I would just use that say that the remainder of the funds from the existing lien supra shall be used for the expansion of the Nevis M. Flores Memorial Library to fund the financing, design, and construction of the Children's Museum and Planetarium. And again, this was at the request of a lot of folks in the community in reference to addressing the need for the library and construction of the Children's Museum. So I proffer that as an amendment, and I hope my colleagues will support this effort.
On the Munya Barnes amendment, Senator, we'll start with Speaker Wampat, Senator Tom Matta, and then Senator Frank Hudson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I know that there's been a lot of discussion in the media, And this all started out, I understand, with, well, several things. One is how are we going to revitalize Hagatnya? How do we increase the footprint, traffic into our library and Hagatnya? What do we do with an educational planetarium? Many years, I know, 2006 is when I heard about the Children's Museum. When all these things started to happen, and then, of course, knowing that 1.28 million surely isn't going to go entirely to the security cameras, is then the balance of this. And what I've done to just kind of see exactly what it is that, you know, this would be yielding and how much are we looking at. And I had spoken to the chairman or the president of a whole slew of departments and agencies, but primarily Mr. Cameron, who is the chair of the public library as well. And I've learned, and the reason why a lot of things are moving so fast is because I learned on the day of the groundbreaking over for the museum, and there was discussion to possibly even put the planetarium there, and because of the plans all being done, Mr. Cameron just felt that they didn't have the additional money to be able to do that. Mr. Cameron had mentioned, of course, that they are in receipt of $1.5 million to do an expansion for a children's library. And then I met with several individuals in our community who have established a foundation and have been planning for many years. And they were actually going to move forward at the Ganya Shopping Center, but based on what it is that they wanted to do, and then the terms in which the shopping center was going to allow for this museum, it wasn't worth their while to continue for such a short time to be able to be housed there, and all the investment for the inside, let's say, of the museum, the hands-on interactive type of a museum for children, was just not worth it to be only there for a couple of years. So I met with them to see then what their plans are, if they have any plans, and apparently they've gotten a lot of individuals in the community, even architects, engineers, attorneys, to pro bono, to put a lot of these ideas down on paper. And so when we were looking, of course, wanting to know, is this something that is reachable, attainable, feasible, financially attainable, when you consider how much a children's library will cost, $1.5 million from DOI. And then did some amortization of what we were looking at the balance of $481,000 to see then what really we could get for that. And if, let's say, just being very conservative here, and I know we did very well with 1.69 with this last bond, but being really conservative, let's say at 4%, the 481,000 would yield $2.889 million, and even if it was 5%, then it would be $2.785 million. And these amounts that we're looking is almost double that of building a children's library. So I mean, I'm no construction expert, and neither am I a financial expert, but just on looking at this amortization and what the balance is that can be used for a museum and planetarium, because if you really stop and think about it, we're looking at a 2-story library, and that's the entire height of that facility. And then you need, for the planetarium, a facility that would also be about 50 feet high to be able to put the dome in there, and in the discussion that we had in the round table with the university was that they were saying that one of the investment that they can do with the monies that are currently sitting in the endowment fund is to actually make it a multi-media room as well, in which you have these interdisciplinary teaching and experiences that the children could have in a museum slash planetarium. So I do rise then in support of the amendment. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
On the Money Barnes amendment, will be calling Senator Addott, then Senator Uggan, then Senator Pangilinan. Anybody else? Senator Lim Tiaco, Senator San Agustin, Senator Yamashita. San Nicolas. I'm writing it down as San Nicolas, but I'm... All right, Senator Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think, you know, in just on the face of it, certainly the project of constructing or expanding or constructing a children's museum and a planetarium is certainly a project that I think I could get, you know, behind and support. I'm just concerned, though, that the concern that I have is that we're putting in something that's quite different from what Bill number 1 really is all about, and that's about putting in the security systems at the school. And I'm concerned that this bill, by now, you know, putting in additional things, the probabilities of it getting vetoed because maybe the governor doesn't like, you know, putting that $500,000 there. I don't think we need to subject Bill number 1 to that sort of risk. And solely because of that, I would object to including this language here. However, you know, alternatively, I don't know. Maybe I would just object to this simply because it puts the bill at risk.
Thank you, Senator Addott. Senator Uggan.
Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, just looking at the proposed amendment to the legislation, obviously, who would want to oppose the construction of a children's museum and even inclusive of a planetarium? Obviously, those would only add to what our people here can enjoy and appreciate in terms of places to visit on island, and then also for our visitors from off island. But you know, Mr. Speaker, it was mentioned during the course of the initial introduction of this legislation that there are perhaps 4 schools that already have an electronic monitoring system in place. So if you're looking at, hypothetically, because I believe the numbers may have adjusted, 31 schools minus 4, we are down to 27 schools that will need electronic monitoring systems installed. And I think that the previous speaker to me standing up here shared some concerns in terms of whether, in fact, I mean, I'm going to paraphrase, whether in fact the $1.2 million is sufficient to be able to address that particular requirement. And you know what, I guess I was going to also add to some additional questions in terms of this legislation, but this is something that this amendment, certainly I support the concept, but I do have concerns about inserting it into this legislation, primarily because $1.5 million has been identified for the funding for perhaps such a facility. We don't even know if the $1.5 million is sufficient and what the additional requirement is going to be. So I'm just kind of looking at this, Mr. Speaker, and if there's any additional enlightening information that can be provided in terms of maybe the cost of the electronic monitoring system is going to be $800,000. with the availability of the funds, and then the remaining balance can be allocated towards this particular amendment and addressing the Children's Museum and the planetarium, then certainly, then there will be that allocation of resources. But looking at 27 or 28 additional schools that will need electronic monitoring systems installed and maintained during the course of every calendar year, I think that the cost may be perhaps slightly upwards of what the legislation may provide. I'm not too sure of the numbers, but that's just a concern that I have. And I think that the primary focus of the legislation really should be emphasized in terms of moving forward with this particular proposal. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Speaker Pangilinan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the amendment but against the appropriation. Mr. Speaker, let me just kind of lay out what we're dealing with here. This is not newfound money. This $1.2 million is what we spent last year to pay a loan that we finally paid one off without refinancing. Almost every loan in this government, very rarely do we pay a loan off. We always refinance it. So that we're always incurring cost of issuance, insurance, bond fees, underwriter fees. This one, we took a short-term note and we paid it off. And it was paid off, we made the final payment this fiscal year, or last fiscal year. So the appropriation that would have made of $1.2 million to pay for that loan is no longer needed. However, the governor, in submitting the budget for FY 2014, has already taken this 1.2 and allocated it across the government of Guam. So this money is really, we're now in a battle with the governor on prioritizing. Now, I support the $800,000 for the Department of Education. And the reason why I support that is because the Department of Education, in submitting their FY 2014 budget, has requested and in their budget, I think $1.8 million for security and security cameras. So what's going to happen is we're going to reduce that $1.8 million request by the $800,000 here, because we don't have enough money. When the governor submitted the budget, he took like 70% of the budget almost and said, it's all mine in the executive branch, and the rest of it, the legislature, the public auditor, the mayors, the judiciary, public defender, and all the semi-autonomous agencies now, UOG, GCC, have to fight for the remaining 30%, which is almost 30% less than what they're operating on today. So we're going to have a real dicey time trying to deal with this budget that the governor submitted, because he has already shortchanged DOE. But because DOE in their budget has allocated a portion of that budget for security cameras, I can see them taking this 800 and saying, next year you're going to get this 800, you're not going to get the 1.8 you asked for. We have 481,000 left over, but that money's already been allocated. And I don't know what other requirements there are of this government based upon, well, I do know they're all within the Department of the semi-autonomous agencies, judiciary, the legislature, UOG, GCC, DOE, that are going to have been allocated less money. And we need, it could be this 800 has already been allocated for salaries, for teachers in the classroom, or power bill, or some other need of this government that may be a little bit more pressing than a children's museum and a planetarium. And I think we're still trying to work with alternatives to finding opportunity for a planetarium to be funded through federal grants or other mechanisms. But at this time, in my assessment of what has been submitted, this money really isn't available for this purpose. If we're going to pass this amendment and allocate this money, remember this is I'm assuming this is for the next 7 years as well. $3 million for the next, or 4.8 million, I mean 480,000 for the next 7 years. Can we afford it? Is that the priority that we have? I support children, I support libraries. You know, a couple weeks ago I took 3 boxes of my old books and donated them to the library because they need books. And so, you know, I donated them because they asked for it. And so I emptied all my shelves at the house and donated the books because they've been sitting there after I've read them over these last couple of years. But I realized their need, but I don't know that this is the most pressing need we have for this very, very rare resources that we have at this time. You know, unless, of course, we have a $10 million surplus. You know, and I'm still trying to look for it. And I hope I find it. I hope I find a $40 million surplus instead. But I doubt it's there. And definitely in the budget submitted by the governor, there is no surplus. He has taken the money, allocated to the maximum he could in the executive branch agencies and left every other agency and branch short. And so looking at this, I can't support at this time without doing the budget first of allocating this amount of money that is already allocated in the budget submitted by the governor. Otherwise, I'd have to cut $480,000 from some department and agency in order to fund this appropriation. And I just can't do that at this time and make that certain decision to do so. So we continue to look for opportunities for continuing a planetarium program at this time, and there are many people out in the community that are scratching their heads and opening up websites and searching for federal grants, and I'm sure somebody's going to get creative on this. We're going to continue to do that, but I can't at this time support this amount of money for this purpose with the many unknowns of the upcoming budget.
Thank you very much. Senator Nicholas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a 5-year-old son and a 2-year-old daughter, and the idea of a children's museum and a planetarium for them is a wonderful idea. But I cannot rise in support of this amendment, Mr. Speaker, because we only have 10 police cars on patrol in our community. GPD recently got $350,000 in compact impact money to get about 7 more cars, but they need $650,000 in order to bring the fleet to full capacity. We have about, based on the National Guard's report, we have 13 police officers who are going to be deployed. And over the life of this 7-year, $480,000 allotment, we could pay for 2 police officers $50,000 worth of salary and benefits for 30 years if we were to have the money focused on hiring more police officers. If we were to have this money appropriated for the specific purpose of bringing our police department to full patrol capacity, I think that would go a long way towards reducing the amount of break-ins at Emuluhan, BMS, GW, UGOF, and Agodzin, and the 218 break-ins that have taken place from 2010 to present. We have to remember, Mr. Speaker, that even if we do build this museum and this planetarium, or even if we do buy the security cameras, crime is going to take place, if not at the schools, then someplace else, if we do not have the deterrent in place with our police department being in full capacity. If we wanted to look away from deterrence and if we wanted to actually look towards creating opportunities for our people, based on the numbers provided to me from the Guam Regional Transit Authority, this $3,367,000, which is the $480,000 times 7 years, This amount could procure 16 paratransit buses and 9 fixed route buses for the Guam Regional Transit Authority. And that would go a long way towards mobilizing our workforce. It would go a long way towards providing members of the community access to transportation to get around the island, take advantage of what's already here. The idea of a children's museum and a planetarium is a wonderful idea. And I believe that if we manage our money well and we work towards that end, we can get there. But as of right now, with the shortages in our police department, we need to focus those resources on getting them back up to full capacity. And even if we get them back up to full capacity, Mr. Speaker, then we can take those resources and focus them on areas where we can get more economic development through our mass transit. So I rise, as the good Speaker Ben Pangilinan, I also rise in support of the amendment, but not in the appropriation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Nicholas. Senator Yamashita.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to speak on this amendment. As previous speakers have raised, perhaps a question of germaneness, because it's maybe a different topic in relation to security measures. I want to make a comment that, as previous speakers had talked about priorities, talked about quality of life, talked about the responsiveness of the government and how we're supposed to be supporting the different aspects of our government, I would like to suggest that one of the best ways to address crime, to address overcrowded prisons, to address mental health issues, to most certainly address drug abuse, to address the 3,000 CPS cases that we are now at every year, of which half of those are to children under the age of 8, which means 1,500 of our kids under the age of 8 are being abused, socially, emotionally, physically. To address the graduation rate and the dropout rate, and as we all know, 300 births a month we have on Guam, and 10% of that is to teens, excuse me. That, yes, we do need to ensure our public safety is up to speed. We do need to ensure that our first responders are adequately equipped. But the other way to look at this is to look at how are we investing in human capital. Yes, planetarium, children's museum may be nice to have but not necessary. But I ask this legislature to start thinking about how do you strengthen opportunities in early childhood education? What opportunities do we give to our families? Where do we have them to go so they can learn with their children, so they can learn how to parent and how to support one another? We have different places across this island right now, but it is most certainly fragmented. And last term, this good legislature passed the Early Learning Council statute, and they are working. Nice to have, not necessary. I suggest need to have, very necessary. We must start somewhere. We have right now a Head Start program that provides services for 500 kids, but they have 450 on a waiting list. We have 157,000 people on our island, Mr. Speaker, and 44,000 of them are receiving some sort of public assistance. Every 2 weeks, one of us kills ourselves, Mr. Speaker. Our sexual violence rates are incredible. And a way to address the social fabric of this island that is deteriorating, of which we just saw last week, our own, is to get serious about early childhood education. And these kinds of opportunities, planetarium, children's museum, we need to have those kinds of places where our families can go to learn, to be with their children in appropriate settings. I can guess what's going to happen to this amendment already, the realities. But I ask that we, as policymakers, put as a priority the investment of human capital in the first 8 years of our lives. It's just something that we really need to do. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yamashita. Anyone else wish to speak on the Munya-Barnes amendment. There has been an objection raised. Please.
Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the retiring speaker for speaking on the amendment. And, you know, I truly believe in a saying that my dad taught me once, and taught me when I was younger, I mean, and it said, build it, he said, build it and they will come. And as we look at economic opportunities, as we look at our social fabric today that needs to be enhanced upon, as we look at really the need for our society, for our community, for our children, you've got to start somewhere. And I know that if I let this amendment go through, it's going to fail. I don't got the 8 votes. But I will say that it doesn't stop here. I'm going to move to withdraw this amendment, but I'm going to work on the commitment of seeing that there's a standalone bill for this, because I truly believe in my heart that there's a need, and I'm hoping that my colleagues in this body will assist me and help me, because if we don't build it, they won't come. If we don't have nothing to show for our children to learn, for others who want to visit this tropical paradise, then we would not have an identity. We would not have a place where our children can continue to learn. I'm not saying that there's not other places that you can, but sometimes there needs to be a place where people can go to, where children can go to, where things can truly happen. So with that being said, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to move to withdraw my amendment.
On the motion to withdraw, there being no objection. On the main motion, I have Senator Duenas, and then Dr. Senator Morrison, and then Dr. Yamashita.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to speak on the main motion on Bill number 1. Kind of a funny moment this morning, Mr. Speaker, as my good colleagues on the Republican side of the House had an early caucus to just get ready for session. And of course, many of us have bills on the agenda, and I said, I love Bill number 1. It's probably the most important thing we're going to do in this session. And I still believe that, Mr. Speaker. This is an excellent bill, and I rise in full support of it. You know, Mr. Speaker, we don't even have to really throw around the numbers. We all know that over the last several years, probably the last decade, we have lost millions and millions of dollars with regard to the break-ins in our schools. But more than that, Mr. Speaker, and I remember talking about this when the ERA money came out, and we were having roundtables with education, that we're going to spend these millions of dollars not only on upgrading our schools, but buying computer equipment and refurbishing STEM classes and doing all these things to bring technology into the schools and get these things started. And at that time, there was a discussion. Well, you know, we could barely keep these thieves and these people who steal our dignity out of the schools now, let alone when we put in millions of dollars worth of equipment. You know, what more? And so, Mr. Speaker, I just have to say that it is just time to stop the madness and to make sure that there's a message that goes out in our community that we're going to protect our schools and we're going to find innovative funding mechanisms to do it, to prioritize what we're going to do. And as I close, Mr. Speaker, it's more than money, though. You know, my good colleague on the floor here who preceded me at DYA started a real movement up there in terms of refurbishing that facility, in terms of trying to build additional facilities, and I worked hard behind him to make sure that I did the same thing. Because even with kids who have the most tough situation in front of them, if you give them an environment that's conducive to learning and rehabilitation, good things happen. So more than just this investment and more than the millions of dollars we've lost, Mr. Speaker, if we can finally bring a sense of security to our school campuses, I believe we can make a huge step in the lives of our children in understanding that they come to these facilities on a daily basis and not see their classrooms in ruins, their property stolen, their principals running around trying to figure out how to get a hold of their parents so they can cancel school. So, Mr. Speaker, for that reason more than anything else, I rise in full support of this measure, and it's about time, once and for all, we secure our campuses and secure the place where our children go to learn for here on forward. And even when this funding source runs out, we just have to find this money and do it once and for all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Duenas. Senator Morrison, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this bill. I applaud the Speaker for moving this route. I echo everyone's, our colleagues here, must do everything we have to do to protect our children. But I'm just want to raise a concern that we are under the assumption that under page here, page 2, under contractor, that we are assuming that the contractor is a licensed contractor of Guam. And Mr. Speaker, having dealt with qualified contractors, there has been many times that a lot of these qualified contractors are unlicensed. So I'd like to suggest an amendment on line 21, item B, that the contractor shall mean a licensed contractor with the government of Guam. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much for that amendment. On the Morrison amendment to add licensed, any senator wish to be heard on the Morrison amendment? Is there an objection to the Morrison amendment? Any objection to the Morrison amendment? Senator Limtiaco.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I'm not mistaken, that would be covered in the procurement process of GSA, as part of that procurement process is to present a valid business license in most procurement. So, would that satisfy Senator Morrison's concern?
Senator Morrison.
Yes, a lot of this, Mr. Speaker, is specified in these processes. But again, we want to spell it out through this legislation, so that way we don't make mistakes even through that process. Again, from experience, and we have qualified contractors out there, but we want to ensure that it's clear that they are licensed contractors with the government of Guam.
Thank you very much, Senator Morrison. On the Morrison amendment, is there an objection? Dr. Yamashita.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to make a comment on Bill number 1-32 LS. Mr. Speaker, I stand in full support of this measure. I think it's a statement of the times that we've gotten to this place on our island where we actually have to install security systems to ensure that our facilities are safe. It's an unfortunate statement, but that's where we're at. And certainly previous speakers have addressed or cited all the data about the break-ins and what this hopes to stop. I want to add to the reason why this is a good idea, and that is in addition to ensuring that our capital outlay and our equipment and our materials, our campuses are not broken into and vandalized or broken. Actually having these security systems on throughout the school year actually will help curb the bullying that goes on. because the eyes are going to be on. It would actually help the high incidence of unkind and hurtful behavior that goes on between our students, between the adults on a campus, between visitors. It actually may heighten the type of respect that we should be finding in all of our school campuses. So in addition to keeping our copper wire in our schools and our computers in our schools, I'm thinking that intrinsically, decent human behavior may be on the increase because our students and our adults will know that someone's always watching them. And that also is an unfortunate statement to have to make, but it is the truth. Because we all know the type of bullying, the type of hurtful behavior that occurs. And so I'm hoping that this investment will help curb that, so indeed the investment in human capital will be made, as well as the investment ensuring that our equipment and everything else is protected and secured. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Yamashita. Senator Tom Abbott first. I'm sorry, Senator Respicio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the main motion, correct? Yeah. If the author of the bill would yield, I have 3 questions. One is on page 4 there, it talks about providing a cap of $800,000 per year. I'm just not quite clear. We know that we've identified 1.28 million, but we're capping. So are we saying that is how much is to be spent and no more than $800,000 a year for the security system?
Yes. We didn't want to, see, the plan originally was 800,000 for security cameras, and the balance was supposed to be for the museum, because we didn't want that situation where they can go upwards of up to $1.2 million, and that's the whole purpose of capping it at $800,000.
So then that then begs the question of how do we arrive at $800,000? How do we know it's not going to cost $900,000?
No, I mean, there's no magic formula, of course. It's just in determining what the 2 projects that we wanted to pursue, making that at 800 so that the other project can go forward. So, no, it just means then that the government, when they go out to procure this, it will be based on the lowest bid, and it would be at $800,000 or lower.
So essentially then what I understand is that we're going to go out and procure $800,000 worth of security systems, and if that covers 27 schools, fine. If it only covers 20 schools, then 20 schools is what we'll have, well, as opposed to basically, you know, initially, I believe this bill had identified the 1.28 million for the security systems.
No, actually the 1.2 was just identification of a funding source based on a debt obligation that we currently have. So that's what's going to become available when it matures. But we don't want to, so that's not the amount for the security cameras. And that's in the bill is that there's this requirement to do a system-wide security study to make sure that they're able to say what it is they want. They'll stipulate that in the RFP for approximately, I would say about 30, maybe 35, 34 schools. And for this dollar, I mean, they won't say for what dollar amount. And then the security people who would apply, who would submit their bid, then if they fall within that dollar amount or lower, then usually what GSA would do is then award the lowest bidder. So, but it's not for 1.2, but rather for 800,000.
Okay, so then now I understand why we're capping it. We're basically just saying we're going to procure up to $800,000 worth of security systems, which could cover all the schools and possibly not Thank you for that clarification. The other question that I have is regarding the security system study. Now, I recall in the public hearing that the consultant that was there from one of the companies that came to testify talked about that maybe 58C104 really should be entitled risk analysis. And during the public hearing, the consultant was talking about that there's really two steps that needs to be done in this procurement process. One is that the school needs to go out there and do a risk analysis to determine what they think they need or where their most vulnerable areas are based on their experience. And then, you know, for school number one, they may say, you know, what we really need to have secured and monitored is the library and these set of classrooms and whatnot. And then based on these risk analyses that were conducted, then these will form the basis for the specifications for the appropriate school security system that, that each of the prospective bidders will then develop. So it's based on the risk analysis of the people, the principal, the assistant principal will determine based on the risk analysis. So and the reason why I bring this up, because I'm concerned when we talk about, it says here, the superintendent of education shall perform or cause to be performed a system-wide comprehensive study. And I can almost envision this study that's going to drag out, and you know, next year we're still studying it, as opposed to let each school do a risk analysis, provide that, give that as an input that will be put into the RFP or whatever process is going to be used for procurement. And so based on that, I would like to make the amendment, basically that the title on line 21, on section 58C104, that the title of that should be risk analysis. And it would read then, the superintendent of education shall perform or cause to be performed a risk analysis at each school that will be the basis for the specifications for an appropriate school security system for each of the school campuses at DOE. So all it is it's basically, as opposed to this system-wide comprehensive study, we've got 34 schools. Each school takes care of their own risk analysis. I could have this written out, but that's basically the amendment, and it's really pretty simple. So that's the amendment that I would like to make, which basically says each school conduct a risk analysis. That would be the basis for the specifications for the appropriate school security system.
On this amendment by Senator Tomata, any senator wish to be heard?
Okay. Thank you. Now, on page 6, on line 2, it talks about after this risk analysis is done, that nothing happens until that is done and until the study required by the section is submitted to the legislature. And I'm asking, why the legislature? I'm going to, you know, if I get a copy of that risk analysis, I'm going to look at it and say, uh-huh. Then what? I'm not an expert. So I'm just, you know, maybe this requirement to have it submitted to the legislature, I'm not sure I understand why, other than that then, so based on my understanding right now, the amendment that I would propose is that on line 2 of page 6, it should read, study required by this shall not occur until the study required by this section is completed, period.
On that amendment,
I'm sorry.
Senator, Speaker Pangilinan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think that in the past we've had these studies submitted to the legislature just for a check and balance to make sure that we're not experts, but we can all read. And I know of many times where we have had these studies and reports submitted to the legislature to trigger it. We also can take a look at that and make a determination, make suggestions, you know, increase the appropriations, things of that nature that I think it's just good to have that communication open. So there's no harm in submitting it to the legislature, and there's no harm in having another set of eyes and minds look at this thing and seeing whether or not there's any gaps. I mean, the risk analysis that's being performed by the school principals, they're not experts either. Yet we're saying it's got to be by the schools and so forth. So there's just an opportunity here to ensure that everybody's on board and moving along at the pace that's needed to put the systems in place. So to just cut out the legislature, I find, you know, if somebody here gets it, doesn't want to read it, or doesn't think he can understand it, then don't read it and don't try to understand it. But for some of us who kind of want to ensure and take a look at these things and who read things that pass through our desk and that this government is trying to do openly and transparently, I think it's a good thing to exchange this information. And so I would object to just cutting out, submitting it to the legislature, and just letting them move forward with regards to that process. It doesn't hurt and it doesn't harm, and I think it just allows, once again, you know, some different perspectives to all contribute to this whole process. I don't think it's going to get, as my good colleague likes to say, wrapped around the axle because it needs to be submitted to the legislature. I just don't foresee it moving in that direction. So thank you very much. And so I object to the amendment.
Thank you very much, Speaker Ben. That's an objection to the ADA amendment. On the ADA amendment, Speaker Wampat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. If I may, just to do an amendment to the amendment, but rather than, since we made an earlier change from system-wide comprehensive study to risk analysis, that on line 2, that rather than a study, we would repeat the risk analysis. So that's the amendment to the amendment.
I think let's first take the amendment by Senator Ada to take the legislature out of this.
Oh, that, okay.
Let's clear that, and once we clear that.
Well,
I think you already decided, Mr. Speaker, on the changing from a comprehensive study to a risk analysis.
Yeah, no, I know. She wants to add it again in here, but...
Well, just to make it consistent. So maybe I don't need to make it consistent. Legal counsel can make that consistent then. Okay, so
we'll delay that, and let's get back to the ADA amendment on removing the legislature.
Okay, well...
Let's focus on that.
I mean, I understand where both our colleagues are coming from, and I think maybe what I'm thinking, and I'm going to think out loud here, and maybe the author, the mover of the amendment, will consider it, is that we don't want this to proceed by having to wait for the legislature to take action. I think what we would like to have here is for them to proceed with, you know, the project by procuring all this, and all that could happen is, and not stopping anything, is that then, like all correspondence to the legislature, or all studies, or all findings, whatever, that just be sent to the legislature, but not necessarily for action. And those are just my thoughts, and I don't know what our colleagues would think. But anyway, that's it.
Okay. We're still on the ADA amendment. Anybody else wish to speak on Senator Tom's amendment? Senator Tom.
Mr. Speaker, I certainly don't want to deny anybody to see a copy of this risk analysis, so I will withdraw my amendment, and they can go ahead and submit it to the legislature. So whoever wants to see it will have a copy of it.
Okay, thank you. All right, you still have the floor. I thought you said you had 3 amendments.
Oh, yes. The next question that I had was that on page 6, line 5, it talks about, in this section, it talks about the expedited procurement and that GSA shall expedite the procurement process for the awarding of the contract under this act no later than 60 days from the passage of this act. And I know that at the public hearing, at least the consultant from the security company was there and, you know, said, gosh, we're probably going to need more like 120 to 180 days. First, this risk analysis has to be done, and then the prospective bidders are going to want to go out there and take a look, because then based on that, on their assessments, then they can actually make their proposals and make their cost estimates and whatnot. And so he's thinking, you know, realistically, we're going to need about 120 to 180 days. And there's no, I guess maybe by providing more time, the expectations are much better aligned with what can be realistically delivered. But in addition to that, in this procurement process, I don't know whether we need to be more specific, because it doesn't say in, you know, is this going to be a bid or is there going to be an RFP? And I would like to see language to the effect that the procurement shall be through a request for proposal to allow security experts to propose alternative designs and systems for the least possible cost. I don't know if that's, you know, if that's going to really go against the grain of the procurement law to specify that this is going to be an RFP, because they may break it up. How much for the hardware, how much for the monitoring, how much for the preventive maintenance that were all, you know, in the definitions. And of course, the simplest thing is just simply say, you got 180 days to award this thing, and however you do it, it's up to you. So my amendment is on line 5, page 6, to change it from 60 days to 120 days. And this was basically based on the input from the security consultant that was at the public hearing.
On the ADA amendment, Senator Uggan, anybody else wish to be heard on the ADA amendment going from 60 to 120? Senator Uggan, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I understand completely the concern of the sponsor of the amendment. But as I read this, and the good sponsor of the legislation had enlightened me in terms of how to more or less interpret this entire process. If you take a look at the requirement for the security system study, it requires that the superintendent go out and proceed and conduct a system-wide school security assessment in terms of how they want to proceed. Now, whether it's electronic system or a security guard system is still something that I have a concern about, but just focusing on the process. The superintendent of education conducts his assessment, let's say completes it in about 3 or 4 months, and says that the viability of an electronic system would cost this much. Then the subsequent section, which the good sponsor of the amendment is trying to amend, would require that within 60 days from the passage of the act, and that's where the key provisions come in. It really should reflect upon 60 days upon the conclusion of the assessment by the superintendent, so that it follows concurrently, where we maximize the time frame in terms of being able to go out and procure the electronic system as provided in this act. So in 3 or 4 months, superintendent conducts his assessment, goes out and acquires as much information as possible, and says this is going to cost the people of Guam anywhere from $800,000 to $900,000. That time that elapses in terms of conducting that comprehensive study is anywhere from 3 to 4 months. That's my hypothetical assessment, because he has to conduct something that is going to be cost effective and also is going to benefit the expenditure of funds in the future. Subsequent to that, then 60 days. My understanding by the sponsor of this bill, that 60 days after that process is completed, then within that 60-day time frame, the RFP or the RFB really should go out to procure such services. So I understand that would just expand the timeline, Mr. Speaker, and it's a concern that I have, just taking into consideration the scenario that I just painted. So I would like to have the sponsor of the amendment consider within 60 days upon the conclusion of the study, because I think his concern is shared by all of us, that the quicker is done, but it's got to be done correctly. What this requires is that within 60 days, if he's willing to look at amending his amendment, it would be 60 days upon the conclusion of the comprehensive study that an RFP and RFB has to be let out in terms of receiving some responses. So that's my suggestion on my part. Otherwise, you know, we're extending it an additional 120 days for the duration of the entire process, which perhaps may not be necessary as it applies to whether in fact we want to urgently proceed in the direction of implementing the study and making sure that the process, whatever the recommendation comes out of the superintendent, is adhered to in terms of getting a security system in place. So I would like the sponsor of the amendment to consider that. If not, I really don't have, I'm not objecting to his proposed timeline. It's just acknowledging that it would extend the timeline an additional 120 days beyond perhaps the original intent of the legislation. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Reagan. Any other senator wish to be heard on the ADA amendment?
He wants to speak on it now.
Mr. Speaker, if I can be recognized, please. I'm sorry. I just briefly conversed with the sponsor of the amendment, and I think that we understand the timelines, and taking that into consideration, I'd like to proffer that the amendment read no later than 60 days upon the conclusion of the study, comprehensive study required in the preceding section.
Does everybody understand that amendment? 60 days upon the conclusion of the...
So rather than 120 days, Mr. Speaker, it would be no later than 60 days upon the conclusion of the comprehensive study to be conducted in the preceding section. So the words from the passage of this act would be deleted. Did you want me to put that in writing?
We'll take a few minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Senator Respicio on the main motion. Senator Respicio, thank you very much. No. I thought he withdrew. On the Tom Atta amendment then, please.
Yeah. I'd just like to have everyone think about it, actually the 120 days would work when you consider where we are today and where the Department of Education will be. Is that, first of all, we got to look at some dates. The 120 days will take us up into June, and then you have July and August, because in August our schools will open, and the schools already have put out the RFP to purchase laptops and computer stations for the children and the teachers, and it's critical that the security cameras be in our school system. You know, there was a difficult process for the Department of Education. It's taken this long because they've never really addressed the security cameras for the schools until just now with Bill 1, and I know they had provided it in their budget request because they are already proceeding to spend those monies that's in the trust, which originally were our monies, and they need to be able to do those now. They can't really waste any time. So with looking at the 120 days then from the passage of this act, that hopefully then that they would move quickly to be able to do this risk analysis, get out then the IFB, because my understanding is that there really is this two-tier process for procurement, that the IFB, which is an invitation for bid, and in that one is you want to make sure that there's this technical assessment bid in terms of what the equipment will be provided, and then secondly then, and if accepted, then they would have to then go to the next step, which will be then now to do a cost proposal, what the financial cost will be then to do all this. So I'm hoping that within that 120 days, and it makes, you know, of course, some sense, that because of that whole step, that it's going to actually take that time, and we would like for it to be ready by August for the opening of the school year, on the second week of August. Thank you very much.
Thank you. On the ADA amendment, anybody else wish to be heard? Is there an objection to the ADA amendment inasmuch as Senator Uggan has withdrawn his?
He objected to his objection, so there's no objection.
Did you have another one, Senator Ada? No. Senator Respicio on the main motion. Thank you. Anybody? Oh, Senator Limtiaco.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the bill. I think the bill is a good bill. It has identified a funding source. Obviously, it has done its due diligence in identifying the cost benefit by deterring theft. And of course, it focuses our resources on our education, Department of Education. I do have I would like the author to yield to a question, if she so may, Ms. Speaker, regarding page, let's see, I think it's page 4. Page 4, 58C 103, regarding the funding source, line 25. I'm concerned that we continuously speak about this $800,000 cap that will be used to procure the security equipment as well as provide for maintenance and monitoring services. However, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the language as it currently reads actually opens up this funding source for $800,000 per year for 7 years, would amount to $5.6 million. Is that the intent of the bill? Do we really need $800,000 in the preceding years for maintenance and monitoring? Or can we scale that back and use the first procurement in year 1 to procure the surveillance equipment and potentially reduce this amount proportionately to account for the maintenance and the monitoring service? I don't believe we need $800,000 per year.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to answer the question, and maybe what could be suggested here is that I know the cap is $800,000, only to make sure that when we go out for bid to be able to purchase the cameras, provide the maintenance of the cameras, that we do not go beyond that amount. First of all, want to make sure. Now, what could be done, because we don't know what the RFP what the dollar amount may be when the bid comes in. It might be 500,000, it might be 700,000, but so maybe what, I don't know if this is acceptable to you, but it could be up to $800,000, but definitely not over. Because initially, when the bill was first written without this amendment, it was going to be that what was or it is available is 1.281, but we're not using, like Speaker Pangilinan had mentioned, we're not using that full amount. That the 481 could be used for other, whether it's just a general fund to go towards other operations or salaries and all that. It's 800,000 of that. So maybe would that help by saying that shall be limited, that the loan itself is 1.28, of which no more than, meaning that you can go up to 800,000, but no more than 800.
So, Mr. Speaker, can I request a recess to discuss the amendment, potential
Please.
amendment?
We're in recess for a few minutes. Senator
Speaker.
Limtiaco, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The author has clarified the question, so thank you.
Any other senator wish to be heard on the main motion? Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I fully support the intent of this legislation. I think that deterring crimes at our schools, especially given all of the crimes that have been taking place to the detriment of our students, is a very, very important thing for us to do. What I'm concerned with regarding this bill, Mr. Speaker, is that the intent the intent lacks the support that it needs from our law enforcement. And I say this because of a recent experience of mine prior to the election in November. My house got broken into, Mr. Speaker, and it took an hour and a half for the police to respond. And when they got there, they were very apologetic, and I very much understood that their resources were so limited that they just weren't able to get there until they got there. To add on top of that, after they were done assessing the area, they told me Crime Lab wouldn't be able to come to my house until the following morning because they didn't have anybody available at that hour of the evening to do the Crime Lab work necessary at my house to get the evidence that they needed to get in order to process the documentation. So we had to leave everything the same at the house, and they came the following morning, again, very apologetic, and expressing to me that their resources were just so limited that they weren't able to respond until the time that they did. I support this legislation and the intent of putting cameras in our schools, and I believe that it will be an excellent thing to do if the back end of support was there in order to make this effective. I believe that $5.6 million can go a long way to our police system. It can increase our patrol capacity maybe by 300% if the numbers from our previous hearings with GPD is accurate, that they need $1 million to get to full capacity. $3 million can triple that capacity, theoretically. And I believe that while the intent to protect the schools is an honorable one, and I'm all for protecting the schools, if we are committing these resources instead to supporting the back end, the police department, I believe that we will be protecting our entire community and not just the school sites. And on the subject of the bill and putting cameras as a deterrent, in the public hearing, I brought up that one of the schools that got burglarized was my wife's school, Stimble Middle School. And it had cameras, and it still got burglarized, and there was still some wire cut and taken out of the school. So the cameras didn't prevent it, and in the hearing it was suggested that the amounts that we appropriate here may procure a system that may prevent that from actually happening the way it did at her school, but the guarantees aren't there. And I go back to the back end of our law enforcement being able to support the intent of this bill, because the way it works at my wife's school is when an alarm is triggered, they call. The security people make phone calls, and they call the administrators to let them know that an alarm has been triggered. And my wife, being the closest one to the school, is always the one that takes the call. And my petite 5'2", 105-pound wife gets into her little Corolla at 2 o'clock in the morning and goes and figures out why the alarm went off at the school. And I'm sitting there with our 2 kids, and I'm worried, because if something's going on at that school, she's not going to be able to do anything about it. And so I really wonder, if we're trying to protect the schools, and of course trying to protect the personnel who are going to be involved in making sure schools are safe, I think we need to be beefing up the back end and making sure our overall community is safe with the resources that are being provisioned in this bill. I commend the author for it. I believe that it is the right step to take when the right support mechanisms are in place to fully effectuate its intent. But until such time that we have more than 10 patrol cars on the streets, and until such time that we have replacements for the 13 police officers being deployed, I think that these resources need to be committed to ensuring that the entire community is safe. And if we can provision that $5.6 million and ask GPD, hey, you know what, we're going to give this money to you, but you need to incorporate a regular patrol into the schools, we might be able to kill two birds with one stone, Mr. Speaker. So I support the intent of the bill, but I just would like to make a statement that the back end needs to be supported as much, if not more, in order for the intent to be fully effectuated. And I believe that our police department can take these resources and put it to use for the entire community, to include the schools, if we take it into that direction. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Nicholas. Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Speaker Pangilinan.
Masim, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the bill. And once again, I just want to reiterate that we do need to protect our schools. And I do want to acknowledge and recognize the Department of Education and the superintendent and its management team at this time, who have not just sat back and waited for action to come from this body. They've actually gone out and been a little bit more proactively reactive in terms of after the thefts of the copper wires that were almost, you know, just heartbreaking in terms of the damage it did and the effects it had on our community and the school children. So they've made some changes. They implemented, of course, emergency measure for patrols at the school and things like that. They've also made a change that, from what I understand, hasn't cost them anything extra, but they've now changed the time custodians are at the schools cleaning. Before, I think they come in at 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and they're out of there by 8. Now, the superintendent has been able to arrange with the schools that have outside cleaning contracts to come in, I think, at 8 or 5, or at 8 o'clock and work to midnight. Different varying times, trying to put some bodies at the school that can provide additional security and a deterrence to these thieves who just come, you know, slithering up into the schools at night. So now we have custodians at the schools at night, providing that extra set of eyes and ears to listen and see what's happening on the campus and try to prevent some of these break-ins and some of this vandalism. So they're moving in that direction. You know, Mr. Speaker, I look at this, is this the best way to secure our schools? As you know, we both worked for a gentleman who had this idea that we should have resident security at the schools, that not only for the schools, but for public parks, that, you know, we find somebody in the community who has an invested interest in the school, in the community, in his village, and that they be given a portion of the school to have a house and be there as a resident security, resident custodian for the school that will be living on the school campus. And so he's there, his family's there, his visitors are there. Find somebody trustworthy, and when they come, you have somebody there all the time. And of course, you know, Governor Bordallo had this idea and this vision of doing something like this, you know, providing employment to those people, but also providing the human touch with regards to the interaction and the dealing. You know, is this the best way to spend $800,000? Is this the most effective way? We'll see. We'll find out. But I would certainly like to see, you know, 20 or 30 residents in those schools. And is $800,000 enough to pay them, to entice them? It might be. It might just be. And maybe in the comprehensive study, they might look at this kind of thing and see if there's any interest out there, number one, if there's any validity to the assumptions we're making that this will also be an effective way, and that they don't just focus now on, I'm just going to get cameras, and that's all I want to do, cameras, cameras, cameras. And that's why I wanted to get up and say, at least the superintendent and DOE is saying, cameras is one option. Hey, custodians working in the schools at night is another option to enhance security that we have, to supplement the efforts of the community, the teachers, the students, and the school community in trying to provide these things. So while we're going to be doing risk analysis, I hope it's not risk analysis only with cameras, that it is risk analysis and a comprehensive analysis of other alternatives for providing care. You know, and so I just want to impart on the school and the DOE that I think they're doing something right in this respect. This body is doing something right in terms of providing that funding source that would allow them to put some kind of system in place, and quickly at that, to ensure that we can continue the progress we have, that we're making in terms of rehabilitating our schools, renovating our schools, providing you know, the technology in our schools, and protect the investments that we're making there through this process. So I stand in full support of the bill, fully knowing that, you know, we're doing this because this funding requirement is already part of the identified budget that DOE has indicated that they're submitting to the legislature. So we'll be able to offset that when the budget process comes around, and we won't be double appropriating. So thank you very much, and Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Speaker Pangilinan. Any other senator wish to be heard on the main motion? Bill 1. If not, I will recognize the sponsor to close.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know we're closing, nearing 5 p.m., and I think that if I may, is that I would just recess until tomorrow morning instead, because there is a language that Senator Limtiaku and I are working on to, especially on one specific section. So it wouldn't take any time. We'll do this after today and be ready for tomorrow morning.
All right, thank you. We have a CODEL meeting tomorrow, don't we? No? It's in the evening?
Yeah. So
Okay, so what time in the morning?
9.
All right, do we stand in recess until 9 tomorrow morning?